This hearing is about the emergence of online video and the power of broadband to change the way in which we watch. And who knows what that's going to be 5 or 10 years from now. This is the start of an exciting and it's a timely conversation. It's the first hearing that's been held on this subject. Now, why are we doing this? Because television is just an overpowering force in our life. Year in and year out, consumers face rate increases for pay television that are rising faster than the rate of inflation. We're paying for so many channels, though we usually only watch a few. I, for example, have 500 channels, and if I watch in the course of a month more than 10, I would be amazed. So why am I paying for 490? I have no idea. Does it give me a warm, fuzzy feeling? Not particularly. But on the other hand, it's all there if I want to go get it. So who's to know about human nature?
The FCC regulates traditional video providers based on a bygone era. When Congress passed the 1992 Cable Act, for example, cable operators controlled 98% of the pay TV distribution market and were affiliated with 53% of the national program networks. A vibrant marketplace benefits consumers and it generates new jobs. The last thing we want is to shackle everyone's entrepreneurial spirit with one-size-fits-all rules designed for another day in time. And if we're not going to apply the old regime to the new participants, we must recognize the inequity of continuing to apply it to the traditional players.
It's appropriate to ask questions about whether the regulations of decades past are, in fact, still appropriate today. Do they inhibit competition or spur it? Do they create regulatory parity or uneven playing fields? And most importantly, do we still work to the betterment of the consumer?
Second, consumers should not be held hostage when retransmission disputes break down. Since 2010, 10 different multi-channel video programming distributors have experienced at least 34 blackouts in at least 76 media markets.
Our challenge is to ensure a diversity of voices, robust competition, and greater access to these new platforms. We should examine whether the legal framework created 20 years ago still works for a video market filled with choices that did not even exist 2 or 3 years ago.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I know it's too late to do a major bill in this Congress, but I hope in the next Congress we take this up and use original principles to review the market. And in general, I think we're better off having less regulation than more, and more enterprise and more market competition than less. The role of government is to provide a level playing field, to prevent a monopoly if possible. If we can't prevent a monopoly, to try to prevent undue market share and be fair to all. So I think this is an excellent hearing, and I look forward to big things happening on this committee in the next Congress. The last thing I'll say, if we're going to do big things, it has to be done on a bipartisan basis. This is not a partisan issue. It will go nowhere if it becomes R versus D. It has to be done in a bipartisan basis. And the good news is, with the leadership on both sides of this committee, that is a very doable deal.
How would you respond to concerns some parties have raised about the impact of broadcast stations' coordination and consolidation on retransmission consent negotiations?
Well, I think speaking for our company, we negotiate only on behalf of the owned stations of the Hearst Corporation. Other companies have pooled some of their retransmission consent negotiations, have created bundles, but I believe in most cases, in all cases, people have been smart enough to acknowledge that they have to break up a bundle. Mr. Ergen wants to buy a station where we have a duopoly separately from KCRA. If he'd like to buy KQCA, I'll sell him KQCA separately. I'll sell him KCRA separately.
And I'm thinking about this from the standpoint of my constituents who work all day, who barely have time to sit down in front of the television, who want to turn on the first game of the World Series, and they, with hope, the Rockies might be in it, although maybe not this year. But but they can't get the programming they want because we've had failed retransmission consent talks. And so my first question is a simple question, and I just, if preferable, I would like to have a yes or no. And that question is, do you think blackouts as a result of the failure of these agreements are fair to consumers, no matter how rare or how often they might be? Mr. Powell, I'll start with you.
No.
Mr. Barrett?
No.
Ms. Sohn?
No.
And Mr. Ergen?
No.
Okay, thank you.
We look at the video marketplace today, it's drastically different than it was in 1992 when Congress passed the Cable Act. Yet the laws and regulations written then still apply today as if a monopoly market power exists and as if innovation has come to a screeching halt. I think it's important for us to go back and, because we take for granted the technology, and, I can look on my video device and watch Swamp People episodes on this video device, and yet the laws that we have on the books today were written when we had these devices for telephones. And so while I can do things today we all take for granted, just remember the law was written when this device was your communications device. Traditional distributors remain subject to archaic regulations while new entrants operate virtually free from the heavy hand of government, but are constantly threatened by the possible extension of these same obsolete rules. Since Congress created the problem decades ago, it has a responsibility to review and fix them today. The current unfair system forces people to turn to the FCC for relief and encourages new entrants to cherry-pick regulations that benefit their platforms. I also question the wisdom of regulating new startups and innovative services as traditional video providers. There are not recipes for encouraging the utmost innovation, investment, and ultimately competition benefiting consumers. Modernizing this decades-old regulatory framework should instead focus on providing relief to all stakeholders by repealing the intertwined 76 and 88 compulsory copyright licenses, as well as the 92 Cable Act. Sweeping away these government intrusions altogether will actually level the playing field for content creators and video distributors alike. Negotiations for broadcast content will then look much like it does for cable programming, where compensation is paid for the issuance of traditional copyright licenses. It's time we recognize the dramatic transformation that has occurred in the video marketplace by getting the government out of negotiations that should be strictly left up to the private sector. I think I know somebody in this subcommittee who's actually got legislation to do just that. I ask you about some comments you made in your opening statement on page 9 and 10. You made specific reference to the legislation I filed, H.R. 3675. In it you say, cable and satellite providers, you're referring to their content. You said, first, they would turn back the clock to a time when cable and satellite providers confiscated and resold broadcast signals to their subscribers without obtaining broadcasters' consent. I'd first suggest to you that my legislation does not do that. I would hope you've read the sections that not only repeal compulsory copyright, but also retransmission consent, which means we would revert to traditional copyright laws. And under the legislation that I filed that you referred to, a company would have to pay for the content that you would provide before they could distribute it. Yet you refer to my bill and you say that providers could confiscate the content under my bill, which is a mischaracterization. I wonder, did you read the bill and have you re-looked at this statement?
I've read the bill. If you say that this is a mischaracterization, I will revisit that.
All right, and just on a final question, Ms. Sohn, you look at this industry, how would you, you've read the bill too, does this legislation that I've filed allow for people to confiscate content and give it away, or would they actually have to pay for it?
No, of course not. I think the thing that keeps getting lost in this conversation is that Mr. Barrett and his colleagues get their transmission means spectrum for free from the public, okay? They get it for free from the public. In exchange, they're supposed to make that signal available for free from the public. So this notion that they're somehow entitled to money for their signal, number one, that's only been the case for the last 20 years, all right? So from the advent of television broadcasting in the 50s till 1992, other people were, quote-unquote, confiscating their signals. But again, that signal is supposed to be free. I don't know how you confiscate something.
But under my bill, if somebody retransmits it, they would have to actually pay and get an agreement with one of Mr. Barrett's companies, pay to get the copyright license.
Right, and that makes more sense. It eliminates the middleman.
So I just ask if you could go back and look at the statement.
I will go back and look, but let me comment that I think the characterization that we get this for free is a mischaracterization. The public trustee model has been in place since the 1920s and the 1930s Communication Act, and it acknowledges that the limited spectrum is a limited resource. It belongs to the public, and those most capable of serving the public interest should be entrusted with that license. And I think the body of record would show that local broadcasters in this country have served the public interest very well, and the notion of free is baloney.
Right. Well, that's referring to over the air. I was specifically asking about the bill that was filed and the copyright laws that would still be in effect if the bill were to file, that nobody could retransmit your signal without first getting an agreement and compensation to you. All right. Appreciate it.
This committee recently held a hearing on the future of video, and I believe that there was broad agreement that the video marketplace has changed significantly since the passage of the 1992 Cable Act. Chairman Janikowski, tens of thousands of New Hampshire residents woke up this morning to a blue screen due to a retransmission consent impasse between Time Warner Cable and Hearst. As a result, our state's only full-power network-affiliated broadcast station went dark on Time Warner Cable. Mr. Chairman, you and I have corresponded over the past year, in fact, one instance in particular just before the Super Bowl, regarding how consumers should not be harmed during these negotiations and why I think it is essential that the Commission complete its review of the retransmission consent rules expeditiously. What is the scope of the agency's authority on this matter, and when will you be completing your proceeding so that Congress may act accordingly?
I share your concern about the issues, particularly the effects on consumers. As I said before, the Commission's authority under the old laws are limited, and I've said that we'd look forward to working with the committee on whether the retransmission consent provisions should be updated as a result of changes in the marketplace. It's obviously an area that we continue to monitor. So it's an area that I look forward to working with you in the committee.
When will you be completing your proceedings? So that I'll repeat my question: is there any timeline here?
If I could, I'd like to get back to you on that. But our options are limited, and I wouldn't say that that should hold up any inquiry by the committee into changing the law, because we've stated fairly clearly the limited nature of our ability to intervene under the current statute.
So the scope of your authority on this matter, you think, is limited, very limited?
Yes.